Okay, and we are recording. Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Friday, July 30th, 2020. My name is Holly Dinnany, and I am happy to welcome you to Family Partners of Morris and Sussex County's weekly Lunch and Learn. I will remind everyone to please mute if you are not speaking, and I will also remind everybody that you are welcome to leave your cameras off. I know many of you are joining us on your lunch break. Today, these are busy times, and if you're nibbling and don't really want to be nibbling on camera, we understand, but we're happy to see your face when we can. Today's topic is understanding the impact of adverse childhood experiences, which are commonly known as ACEs. And as you will remember, this is Lunch and Learn. We like to think of this as lunch with an expert. And today our expert is Laura Berger, who is the youth prevention specialist with intervention. I totally just blanked on your Laura, where are you from?
Center for Prevention and
Counseling. Do you like that? I usually have everything written out and I didn't have that written out, but we are so glad to have you with us to talk about something that has been around for a while, but has a really significant impact on many individuals, communities, and just our general wellness. So a few housekeeping items. Thank you for joining us today. Remember to use the chat function if you have questions. I will be keeping an eye on that for Laura. So if there's something that you would like to ask while she's speaking, she has allowed some time at the end of her presentation for questions. But this is your lunch with an expert. So please, if you are not hearing something that you have burning question that you have or a topic that you want addressed, you know, this program is for you. We are happy that you have joined us. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter, Laura.
All right.
Take it away.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today. I am going to share my screen and pull up my PowerPoint. Oh, I did it again. I didn't share my sound. Okay. So multitasking isn't my thing, as you can see, but I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for having me, Holly, and your whole group. So as you stated, I am the Youth Prevention Specialist at the Center for Prevention and Counseling. And at the Center for Prevention and Counseling, we do prevention, counseling, and recovery for all focused around substance use. And as the Youth Prevention Specialist, there is one of me in each county. So I work directly with the coalition in Sussex County, the Coalition for Healthy and Safe Communities, and there's one in each county. So today we will be talking about ACEs, what they are and why we should care. To start, I kind of wanted to get your feedback to see what your knowledge or what you think that your current knowledge is on ACEs. So if you're able to, I know a lot of you are eating lunch. If you're able to add in the chat box, maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, your knowledge on the term and the subject of ACEs. So 1 being little to none and 10 being super knowledgeable. And I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to do that.
Looks like you got a good spread.
Yes. Awesome. So it does look like we have a good mix of people from 1 to 9, which at 9, you can probably compete with my knowledge here. So if you have anything to add, definitely feel free to chime in. But ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. And so some other terms that we might have heard for ACEs, child abuse and neglect, maltreatment, toxic stress. So where does the term ACE actually come from? Well, the original study, what's termed the original study, was actually started originally by a doctor at Kaiser Permanente who was looking at his patients, and he found a correlation just from like his own personal observation between his obese patients and the type of adverse experiences that they've had or shared with him. So he teamed up with a doctor from the CDC, and they conducted the Adverse Childhood Experience Study that really looked at childhood adversity and how it related to health outcomes. So I'm actually going to start off by showing you guys a video that we made here at the Center for Prevention and Counseling. And it gives you a good overview that then we can discuss in a little bit more detail. So let me know if you guys don't hear this or if it doesn't work, all right? Maybe. This week, I don't know about you guys, but my technology has been, on all the Zoom sessions I've been on, there's been something. So, oh, there we go.
You know what, I'll tell you, Laura, it might help if everyone turns their video off. Sometimes that helps with your ability to do what you need to do. So I'm going to ask participants to turn their video off, and let's see if that helps Laura out.
You know, I'm just going to share it from, I do have it open on my screen too, so. And so just while I'm sharing, I can, I can say that I found it really interesting that the original doctor, that he was looking at weight loss or overweight patients, which is something that I don't think is always shared when we talk about ACEs.
That's very interesting.
All right. Can you guys see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Thank you. And can you hear it also? Are potentially traumatic events that occur in childhood, ages 0 to 17, such as experiencing violence, abuse, or neglect, witnessing violence in the home, or having a family member attempt or die by suicide. The term ACE, or Adverse Childhood Experience, comes from the original study done by a doctor at CDC and Kaiser Permanente. 17,000 adults were surveyed during physical exams. They're mostly in their mid-50s, and about 70% of them were college educated. So with the survey, they were asked 10 questions, and for every yes to a question, that's when they got an ACE point. The types of ACEs asked in the questions were broken down into 3 categories: household dysfunction, abuse, and neglect. They then correlated these ACE scores with health and well-being outcomes. They found that there was a dose-response relationship between number of ACEs, or ACE score, and health outcome, meaning the higher a person's ACE score, the more negative a person's health outcome. These adverse experiences trigger the body's system that governs our fight, flight, or freeze response system. So how does it work? Imagine you are walking in the forest and you see a bear. Immediately, your hypothalamus releases a signal to your pituitary that sends a signal to your adrenal gland saying, release stress hormone, adrenaline, cortisol. Your heartbeat speeds up. Your pupils dilate, your airways open up, your blood pumps to your extremities. You're ready to fight or run from that bear. And that's a good thing. The problem that we're talking about here is what happens when the bear is in the same room with you constantly, and the system is activated repetitively. It goes from being adaptive, life-saving, or productive, to maladaptive, health-damaging, or toxic. Children are especially sensitive by this because their bodies and brains are just developing. ACE exposure can disrupt healthy brain development, affect social development, compromise immune systems, and can lead to substance misuse or other unhealthy coping behaviors. At this point, not only is brain structure and function affected by ACEs or adverse experiences, but immune, hormonal, and even the way that DNA is expressed is changed. There have been several other studies since the original ACE study. The CDC's 2019 Vital Sign Report shows that the number of ACEs experienced, according to research more current, is pretty similar to that of the original study done in the 90s. Let's talk ACEs in New Jersey. According to the most recent data available, over 40% of children in New Jersey, which is more than 782,000, are estimated to have experienced at least one ACE. Consistent with national findings, rates of exposure to adverse experiences are higher in New Jersey for children and families of color and for children living in poverty. In the upcoming videos, we will look more at the impact on communities, strategy, and substance use. Together, we will and are addressing this issue. Thanks for tuning in. So I shared.
I have to ask, is that your voice, Laura? Did you narrate that?
It is my voice, yes.
Aha!
Yes.
Great job.
Thank you. So just some key takeaways from the video. ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, are potentially traumatic events that occur in childhood, which is categorized as ages 0 to 17. I don't know if you guys notice, but the ACEs are common. So this original study that was done in the 90s, I should say, the 67% of people had at least one ACE. And this was a middle class population that they were surveying at the time. So you can imagine, you know, when we look at other groups and who might have different socioeconomic conditions, how ACEs might affect them more, and how research shows that those in lower socioeconomic conditions and in different areas across the whole country are affected more or have a higher ACE score. And then that stress can make long-lasting changes to the brain. So I'm sure a lot of you guys know that, you know, our brains are like neuroplasticity, they call it. So our brains are able to take change pretty well, but when children face adversity at a young age, when their brains are still building all these connections, that's when we see the most prevalence in changes and possible detrimental effects to the brain. And then we saw that ACEs can have long-lasting impacts on life potential, graduation rates, academic achievement. There's one about children being held back at a higher rate when they have a higher ACE score. I think this original study was really transformative because it associated ACEs, or these adverse experiences, with not just mental health, but also with physical health, and how obesity, diabetes, rates of depression, STDs, heart disease and especially autoimmune disease in women, could then be tied back and seen at a higher rate when people had a higher ACE score. And then behaviors, so smoking and alcohol and drug use, which is what I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about today, the association of between ACEs and substance use. So this original study, again, done in the 90s, so Holly brought up earlier that we've had this research for a while. It seems like lately we're hearing about it a lot more. Like a lot of research, it takes like an average of 17 years, something like that, for it to become widely accepted. So this original study was done in the 90s. There have been a lot more studies done since then, like hundreds of studies done since this original study. But the topics were these 10 topics: chronic humiliation, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, physical, loss of a parent, watching a mother be abused, a parent with substance dependence in the home, a parent with mental illness, and an incarcerated family member. So I know that most of you said that you had knowledge in ACEs, but I did bring up this ACE questionnaire. So if you don't know what your ACE score is, if you want to, you don't have to, you can read through, and for each question that you say yes to, that's 1 ACE point. Again, this is kind of a hard topic, so I just encourage you to look out for your own well-being. So if it's not something for you, then you can keep eating your lunch if you are. But one thing that I will say is that in the helping field, which as a nonprofit and as family partners, when people are in the helping field, they are more likely to have a higher ACE score. So I guess a reason for helping others. So I'm gonna give you guys a minute to just keep reading through. If anybody is figuring out the score, if they can just give me maybe a thumbs up when they're done, so I know I can move on.
And Laura, I'm also just going to add in, someone asked if the video that you showed is available on your website.
It is available on the website, and I do have a link that I'll put in the chat.
That's
also.
great. And I think I neglected to tell folks in the beginning too, that we will be sending out a video recording of this presentation so that you can also access information that way.
Awesome. Yeah, and I can share it with you, Holly, if you don't.
Great. Okay. Super.
All right, so I got 1 thumbs up, so I'm gonna keep moving on. So obviously, like most research, there are some limitations to the study. It might not include everything that somebody might see as an adverse childhood experience. So some other things that might not be addressed in there that are also seen as an adverse experience might be community violence, peer-to-peer violence, the death of a sibling, a pandemic. I know right now our stress has changed in a different way.
Or Laura, even with the community violence, right, and the pandemic, there's a lot more challenge than this is a unique time. So I think it's even more important that you're sharing what you are.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that it goes hand in hand with really what we're seeing in the state of our country right now, both with the pandemic and with a call for justice for Black lives and all lives. So since the study, the CDC does follow up each year. They do a survey, and they have over 25 states that are included in the survey. They're adding on states as they keep going. But the 2019 vital sign report that the CDC put out says that 1 in 6 adults experienced 4 or more types of ACEs, which, considering 1 in 6, seems like a lot. And then at least 5 of the top 10 leading causes of death are associated with ACEs. And that preventing ACEs could reduce the number of adults with depression by as much as 44%. And I'm going to get there in a little bit, but also just the significance and the association between ACEs and suicide. So I think am I drawing all over my screen?
I think you are.
Oh my
God! I wasn't sure. I'm not sure where that was coming from. All good.
Oh, that was definitely me. Sorry about that.
All good. All good.
Just adding a little bit.
That's right.
But so when children experience an adverse experience and their brains are still developing and connecting all the different parts, it's shown that it can not only change brain structure and function, but it can also go down to a level of DNA, and it can change the way that DNA is expressed, which is why we see or may see a lot more chronic disease with people who have higher ACEs, because their gene expression to show these autoimmune diseases is then flipped on. And this is important because there's a generational embodiment of trauma, or a historical context to trauma that can be passed down from generation to generation. So this is also from the CDC, and just looking at from the bottom up. So how, trauma can be passed down, and then how societal conditions can also play into a child having adverse experiences. And then once a child does have an adverse experience, how it can disrupt their neurodevelopment, their social, emotional, and cognitive function, then their possible adoption of health risk behavior, disease and social problems, and eventually maybe even early death. So with someone who has an ACE score of 6 or more, the research showed that they had a 20-year lessened lifespan than somebody with no ACE score. So somebody with 6 or more was 20 years less, which is pretty significant, I would say. Mm. And so this is another, I like analogies. So just looking at how the roots of the tree, or the bottom, are really these societal conditions, which especially now in what we're seeing in America, we're really seeing these societal conditions, and how as we're moving up on the tree, it's playing into other things, like adverse childhood experiences. And then the branches on the tree are then these diseases of disconnection or despair. And when I say societal conditions, this includes crime, poverty, racism or historical context of racism, unemployment, really acceptance, I guess, is probably a good way of saying part of that, a big part of that. And so I have another video for you guys. Hopefully I can play it right from here. Maybe.
A
Can you guys hear
correspondent
that?
candid with Oprah Winfrey.
Can you guys hear it?
Oprah, your story for 60 Minutes
Yes.
this week is about
Yes.
childhood
Thank you.
trauma. And there's a lot of new science here about trauma-informed care. For anyone who's dealing with a traumatized child, what can they learn from your story?
Well, I think that this story is it is my hope that our story on trauma-informed care will not just be impactful, but will also be revolutionary. It certainly has caused a revolution in my own life. And I was struck by the story because it reminded me of my own childhood growing up in Milwaukee. It's not lost on me, the irony of being back in the same city, Milwaukee, where I grew up on welfare, poor, a lot of negative experiences, sexual abuse and all of that. What's the difference between a really bad childhood and being able to overcome that and a traumatic childhood and someone not being able to overcome that?
Really, it boils down to something pretty simple.
And the answer that Dr. Bruce Perry gives you is relationships.
If you also have opportunities to be connected to people in positive ways, that can buffer some of those effects. And as you get older...
I'd like to know more about that.
What he really means is love. He's a scientist, he's not going to use the word love, but it really is about how you are responded to, valued, trusted, and loved by those around you. So I didn't get it from the people who I felt I should have gotten it from. It can be anybody who cares enough about you to ask the question, what happened to you?
Could you trace back in your mind, it was that person who made the
I know
difference?
exactly who did it. I know exactly the moment I started to feel valued, and for me, it was school.
I wanted to be a fourth grade teacher because of Mrs. Duncan. And I haven't seen Mrs. Duncan since then, and Mrs. Duncan is here today. Mrs. Duncan!
The moment I felt the most value was in my fourth grade class when Mrs. Duncan said to me, I was the one who was chosen to lead the class and whatever it was.
So what was that like? I don't really remember. I do remember you. That
I
was...
remember you were such a fluent reader.
Well,
if I had had a class full of students like Oprah, I would have been floating on air.
Mrs. Duncan instilled in me this sense of believing that I mattered. And that is what every human being is looking for.
when you first heard that I had done something in life, did you know that it was me?
Yes, I kept up with you without your being aware of it.
And it was Mrs. Duncan who helped heal you?
For me, yes. It was Mrs. Duncan, and then it was my sixth grade teacher, Mr. Graham. It was school that made me feel a sense of value and connection.
You learned a lot on this story.
Oh, I learned a lot on this story. This story was life-changing for me.
Life-changing, really.
Life-changing. And people use that word rhetorically. Life-changing. It's changed the way I operate in my business, with my people, with my school. 1, 2, 3. You say that the most important question to ask of people who have gone through trauma is not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you.
Yeah.
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 So when you see, a church being shot up, or you see, all of the headline-making stories of people seemingly gone mad, your first thought is, what happened to that person?
Right.
Right. What has been life-changing for me is the question, what happened to you? Not what is wrong with you, but what happened to you? Which is an important question, not just for people who have been so-called traumatized, but it's the most important question you can ask of anyone. I can say that of all the stories I've ever done in my life and all of the experiences I've ever had and people I've interviewed, this story has had more impact on me than practically anything I've ever done.
It's changed the way you see everyone?
It's changed the way I see everyone. So when I have an employee who is acting out of line or who is just being a jerk, I don't think, what's wrong with that guy? What's wrong with that girl? What's wrong with that I think, I wonder what happened to them. I wonder what happened to them. I wonder what happened that caused them to behave that way. That's what this story did for me.
So I like this story and I like to share it because I love science and I can talk a lot about the research on adverse experiences and how it affects people. But I think that hearing stories and really putting the science into a story is where it becomes more effective. So she talked a lot about relationships and how people who suffer from traumatic events can have a buffer, let's say, of relationships. And let's see.
A correspondent candid with
So I'm going to come back to that and the how relationships can change the way that somebody who has an adverse experience then sees the world or how they behave. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit more about ACEs and substance use. So in 2017, 2.2 million children were affected by opioid use or somebody with an opioid use disorder, like their parents. So out of that includes children who had an opioid use disorder themselves and then who lived or had a parent with opioid use disorder. So this is specifically to opioids, but when we talk about substance use, we're talking about other drugs and also alcohol. So you can imagine how many more children are affected by substance use in or around their home or suffer from a disorder themselves. And I think it's important to remember this number because one, a child who has somebody in the home that has a substance use disorder then automatically gets an ACE point. But also children who have more ACEs are more likely to use substances themselves or to maybe have some unhealthy coping methods. And also just how not just the children are affected, but then how much it affects society, the economy, and really the whole community. So in regards to substance use, each ACE score increases the likelihood for early drug use and addiction by 2 to 4-fold. And comparing those with no ACE scores to those with 5 or more, the people with 5 or more are 7 to 10 times more likely to use illicit drugs or face addiction. And Felidi and Anda, who do a lot of research across the board, but a lot tying back to ACEs, say that ACEs seem to account for, according to their research, 1/2 to 2/3 of serious problems with drug use. So again, kind of like we heard in the story, talking about, you know, what happened to the person that's causing them to use substances, or is it a way that they're coping, or possibly we see a lot of co-occurring disorders. So somebody who is quote unquote self-medicating for some sort of mental health issue that they're having. So SAMHSA, or the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, I can never get that right, but I got it right that time.
Great job.
Thank you. I should just write it on the slide. That would probably help me out. But they talk about the interconnection of ACEs and risk factors for substance use. So we're talking about early initiation of alcohol use and how prevention methods might not be as effective unless ACEs are addressed as a contributing factor. Higher risk of mental and substance use disorders as older adults, So as ACE score increased, the likelihood of the person having a mental or substance use disorder also increased. Continued tobacco use into adulthood. So these prevalence ratios showed like ever using and also continued use into adulthood, and how somebody with a higher ACE score is more likely to continue or start using tobacco products. And then prescription drug use. This one is interesting because for each additional ACE score, the rate of number of prescription drugs increased by 62%. So for each ACE score, the number of prescription drugs increased by 62%. And so we've seen, we saw earlier, we talked about how people are more likely to suffer from other health problems. But one thing that they've also found is that people who have a higher ACE score are more likely to report a higher pain level. So these prescription drugs, across the board, the increase in using prescription drugs can be a problem ongoing. And then lifetime illicit drug use, drug dependency, and self-reported addiction. So I think it was on an earlier slide, each ACE increased the likelihood of early initiation into illicit drug use by 2 to 4-fold. And so SAMHSA also talks about ACEs and behavioral problems. So we're talking about health and behavior and how it's all related to substance use. So I mentioned earlier about suicide attempts, that there's an increased likelihood that somebody may attempt suicide. And as I'm saying all this, there's an increased likelihood, but I'll make it clear at the end. I want you to know that just because somebody had a higher ACE score doesn't mean that they're inevitably going to be sicker or have more health disparities or, be the one to attempt suicide. And that's where really, I think our role as a community comes in more. But suicide attempts, let's see, I have ACEs in any category increase the risk of attempted suicide by 2 to 5-fold throughout a person's lifespan. And individuals who reported 6 or more ACEs had a 24.36, I do have it here, 24.36 times increased odd of attempting suicide. And 24 times more likely to attempt suicide is a lot, is a big number. And I know that the CDC, I think that their more recent number is even higher than that, in the 30s.
That's very significant, Laura, right?
Right, yes. And then lifetime depressive episodes, that people are more likely to report depression, more likely to self-report sleep disturbances, to have more sexual partners and a large amount of sexual partners, which also is why, puts them more at risk for STDs. A higher rate of fetal mortality in adolescence, and pregnancy outcomes. And the pregnancy outcome, each additional ACE a mother experienced in her childhood has been associated with decreased birth weight and gestational age for her infant at birth. So really, we're seeing how, I think with the pregnancy, how somebody experiencing ACEs as a child can then be passed on to the health and behavior of then their children even. So I like this image, just looking beyond opioid overdose deaths. So, with overdose, we hear the numbers and any number is too high. But this graph kind of shows us where prevention can come in and how there's a lot more going on underneath just the person who died or passed away from an overdose that can be reached at some point and should be reached through any sort of prevention. And this is also, I know Holly said she's seen something like this with the iceberg, but just with overdose and suicide deaths at the top, really being the tip of the iceberg, what we see a lot, and the medically treated suicidal and mental illness and substance use disorders, really being the top of the iceberg, the part that we see the most, but how under the water there's all these different things that contribute to a person getting to that point. And one of those being adverse childhood experiences.
Laura, I'm going to say that someone just shared a very personal story in the chat just about the difficulty of having a trauma younger affected her life, and that, you know, it really, the benefit of sharing these hard conversations, I would assume, leads to healing. Is that a fair assumption as far as with the ACEs? I mean, you can't change what happened, but is it fair, or am I being too optimistic to think that sometimes, you know, Oprah's question of asking what happened, there's benefit that can come out of that? Am I correct?
Yeah, so, you know, addressing a trauma as a trauma or any sort of intervention earlier is always best. So we see that, you know, early intervention with somebody who experiences trauma helps them in an ongoing way. I think with trauma, it's really hard because a lot of people might not heal for a long time, and it's really different for everybody. But just acknowledging these different things as trauma in the community and with each other, I think makes it easier for people to get to a state where they're ready to heal. Yeah. And a lot with relationships too. So I'm gonna move on a little bit to how relationships can be seen as a buffer to help prevent somebody from using substances, but also help people who have experienced adverse childhood experiences in them not seeing the outcomes that are as detrimental. So thank you for sharing your story, Crystal. And oops. Yep, so just ACEs in New Jersey. Let's see. We see really similar research across the board between behavioral health, physical health, education, and criminal justice. So with behavioral health, children who experience 4 or more ACEs are at least 7 times more likely to self-identify as an alcoholic in adulthood. Physical health, there's a lot of different things, but lung disease or chronic obstruction pulmonary disease is a higher rate. We see that at a much higher rate, and autoimmune diseases, especially for women. Let's see, and then criminal justice, I think this is important too, that juvenile offenders are 4 times more likely to self-report experiencing 4 or more ACEs. So when we see children who are quote unquote maybe acting out, like as people might see it, that a lot of times they've been experiencing these traumatic events that might lead them to the behavioral or the decision-making process where they're at. And so I know like this is a topic that's hard, right, to talk about, but something that needs to be talked about, like a lot of things. So our upstream prevention would include ideally preventing these adverse experiences that takes a little bit longer and really takes a collaborative approach to get to the point where you're preventing the experiences. But I know that a lot of people on this call who are working with the community and working with families are helping people in a way that is most likely preventing future adverse experiences. Building resiliency. So I feel like resiliency is like a hot word right now, I guess you could say, especially with what's going on in our world. So I do have a definition of resiliency that I'm going to read to you guys. So the definition I have is a set of inner resources, social competencies, and cultural strategies that permit individuals to not only survive, but recover or even thrive after stressful events, but also to draw from the experience to enhance subsequent functioning. So, you know, when we talk about resiliency, like resiliency can be taught, and it could, I have another resource from the Search Institute on developmental assets and how people can help children build resiliency. And then providing these interventions and supportive services. So like I said earlier, the earlier the intervention, the increase in positive change there is. And there's been a lot of research in ACEs on that, and also in other things like other health effects, like in lead in the water, and how if there's an intervention earlier, how the positive outcomes are more likely. And I'm just looking at my time, I'm going to kind of speed through a little bit. But we know that when children have more positive relationships or experiences, opportunities, that it helps them build resiliency. And with stress, you know, there is good stress. It's when there's too much ongoing stress that the children don't have enough resources or ability to handle positive relationships to help them handle it, is when it kind of tips the seesaw to the negative outcomes. And so the CDC does have action goals for addressing ACEs, to raise awareness and commitment, to promote safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments, and prevent child abuse and neglect, which is kind of a loaded goal, right? Like each goal has obviously a lot of different tiers to actually accomplishing these goals, but using data to inform actions, creating the context for healthy children and families through norms, programs, policies, and then the next one actually is create the context for healthy children and family through policies. So I'm going to come back to this at the end if there's time. Oh, maybe. So just to break those down a little bit more, and you know, what the community can do to address ACEs. One of them is strengthening economic supports to families, and also incorporating family-friendly work policies, like family leave, things like this. Changing the social norms to support parents and positive parenting. So public engagement, campaigns, especially now, I think, like sharing on social media to help support parents and positive parenting, like putting on these webinars that like you guys do to help teach people. Providing quality care, so preschool enrichment, really like looking at the family. So we're looking at the individual and the family here. Enhancing parenting skills through promote healthy child development. So really helping the parent to relieve some stress that then can lift the burden off of them and help possibly prevent an adverse experience for their child. and then intervening to lessen harms and prevent future risk. So also things like screening. Let's see, I'm gonna go to this slide, which looks like just a bunch of words, but things like screening. So screening children, you know, in the school setting, in your counseling setting, in the physician setting, screening them possibly for ACEs. And then obviously early intervention, which, you know, especially right now might be a little harder for some places to intervene because they're having less contact with outside adults. Building developmental assets. Sussex County has a community cares. It's a community policing program that if a child is at the scene of where the police are called to, that then they notify the school that they go to that the child has been involved in something and might need some extra support, or it goes to somebody at the school just so that they have an idea if the kid might need to speak to the counselor, or, you know, if they don't have their homework done, things like this that can carry over from having an adverse experience. And then social emotional learning, which is a big one that we focus on at the center, in my role at least, the social emotional learning to help children build the skills that they need to better cope and to make better decisions, strengthening families, and building resiliency. So I'm just looking at my time here. So we do have a fall conference that's further on ACEs in November, just more about creating a trauma-informed community. And a lot of the, not a lot, but some of the information that I got was from our speaker, who is a scientific journalist and really focuses on adverse experiences. So I will include the videos and the websites when I send you something, Holly, that maybe you can.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'll definitely include whatever you're able to send me, and along with the video. And I just, you know, if are you finished? Because I have a question that I wanted to throw out. Are you done what you wanted to cover?
Yeah, definitely.
And I would also invite my friends who are at the lunch table. If you have a question, please throw it into the chat. But it struck me when you were talking about the significance of relationships, so especially from the Oprah clip.
Right.
I should come back on video. Sorry, I just realized I was still off. That really struck me because I know we were lucky enough to have a presentation from the Center for Prevention a few weeks ago about the services that you provide. And one of the things I was most impressed with was the depth of your peer recovery specialists that they play in your organization as far as peer support. And as I'm sure you know, and hopefully all my friends at the lunch table know, that, you know, Family Partners is a peer support organization. And that we know that any challenges, and obviously ACEs, I would say, is included in that the isolation is just devastating, right? The whole, when someone doesn't know what's under the iceberg, right? What might be causing the challenge, or you might not be able to start that awkward conversation. So I've heard many times it said that like just one relationship can make a significant difference in starting on the road to whether it's resiliency or recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is research that shows that just one positive relationship with an adult when you're a child can help be a buffer against, you know, negative outcomes. So we heard Oprah's story about who her positive relationships were from. Obviously.
Right. And I've heard that for the LGBT community too. Right.
Right. Yeah, so really, I mean, with the LBGT
Yeah, I like
community, Really, we're looking at like acceptance and safety a lot when we're talking about what somebody perceives as trauma. So, you know, finding an adult that accepts and cares is really important for young kids. And it's most effective when it is their parents, but that doesn't mean that the other adults that might be in their life, even if it's just a small part, just how much that relationship really can affect a child in their outcomes. Did that?
And I liked what you said, Laura, in the beginning about, I liked what you said in the beginning about people who are in the helping field. Was that the term that you used?
I did, yes.
I've never heard it called that, but I love it because I think people are often in, and I'm sure many people on this call have chosen this field for personal reasons or the type of person that they are, but no role is too small in the positivity, right? In connecting with the youth or an adult who might have something that they're just not able to express, or that's something that's eating away at them. So I want to, you know, I'm going to give everybody a pat on the back that's on this call, because I know we all know it, but I think you need to hear it, that, you know, what you do every day, you know, and sharing the knowledge even that you have, Laura, you know, as far as how you're helping us understand how to better understand others. There's great power in that. You know, someone once called a family support partner a merchant of hope. And I was so in love with the term, because I think we all want to be that, right? To anyone that we're able to be. And I really appreciate the facts that you've brought to the table, because it seems like there is hope. You know, you said resiliency is kind of an overused word, but it's a real thing. And if we know just a little bit, right? Like if we can kind of look for what's really there, it seems like we have an opportunity to professionally and personally have a positive impact on someone who might be struggling with ACEs.
Right, definitely. Yeah, resiliency is real. And I think that's, you know, I know I said that we've been hearing it a lot, but resiliency is real, and it's a good thing. And just with people and everybody on the call who are in the helping field, you finding a way to maybe somehow address your own trauma is then being shared to help others, which is really powerful for both you and the people that you're helping. So kudos to all of them. And I know personally that's why I'm in the field that I'm in also. And I've been lucky to have positive relationships in my life that have helped me to deal with things, and it on a continued basis, like teaching the kids social emotional learning. Every time I do it, talking about feelings, I find it really helpful for myself in actually sharing my own feelings also, and showing kids that it's okay and it's safe to have different feelings, and sometimes not the best feelings. It's what we all go through, and that it's okay, and that we will work through them.
And I'm going to ask you a rhetorical question, Laura, but, you know, I think we also have to remember as adults in the scenario that it's not selfish to look into our own challenges and our own history, and that the more that we're able to understand ourselves, the healthier we are to help others. I know it's an overused analogy. You said you like analogies, but I love that. The airplane, when it's going down, put the oxygen mask on yourself first and then help those around you, right? It's a similar type of thing, right? With the ACEs, like you said, sometimes when you're looking into something to help someone else, it may unearth a little something in you that you didn't realize was a challenge.
Right, definitely.
Hadn't acknowledged.
I heard somebody just say that self-care is not selfish. And especially, you know, just bringing it back to ACEs with yourself, and also like thinking about a family and how when parents are able to deal with their own stressors better, really like handling what they're going through, then helps the child in ways that they might not even realize. So yeah, you're totally right in that, Holly.
That's great. Well, this has been a wonderful presentation. Laura, I can't thank you enough for everything that you've shared, and that everything that we're going to push forward to the community. And we just need to remember and also thank the Center for Prevention for just providing so many resources that we can all learn from and that we can help each other by, improving our understanding of topics such as ACEs. And is there any parting words of wisdom you'd like to share with our lunch crowd today?
Well, I just saw what Elizabeth had written in the chat, that teaching and practicing with social emotional learning for adolescents is key for ensuring that they have self-knowledge they need prior to making decisions that may impact them long-term. So social emotional learning, things like that help buffer a child from, if they do experience any sort of adversity, is really important in just considering what we're doing in the work that we do, and how in everything that we're doing, how we might have ACEs on the back burner that should be addressed. So hopefully that made sense. Sometimes I can spew things out a lot.
A follow-up to that, Laura, is are we seeing more scientific data that supports things like social emotional learning? Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes when you hear those terms, it sounds kind of hippie, like soft, but it sounds like there's more science and numbers and studies that in fact backs up the benefit of those skills and those teaching children those kinds of things.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely a lot of science showing how impactful it is in a positive way for a lot of different things, for relationships. That there's so much research out there now. So I talked about the original study, but that really kind of was a start of what's now more of like a burning flame in doing this research in relationships, in teaching children social emotional skills, and in different coping methods. So definitely a lot more science out there.
Well, Laura, thank you so much, everybody. Laura Berger, Center for Prevention and Counseling. I will be sending out an email follow-up to everybody. It was a fantastic, I see Maria just said informative presentation, Laura. We appreciate you being here. And I just want to remind our friends that family partners, check out our website, find out we have 6 weekly support groups that are online to help you connect, help you find a positive support scenario. And also that next week for our Lunch and Learn, we will have folks from the Morris County Office of Hispanic Affairs, which is a very misleading title or name of an organization that just provides a lot of resources to the community. And we are hoping that you will come back next week and join us for lunch with an expert. Laura, thank you so much. Everybody stay healthy, and we hope to see you around soon.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great. Take care, everybody.
And Holly,
yes.
Can I be put on the email list so that I can?
You're on the email list, Laura Berger.
Great.
You may certainly, you will receive it. Absolutely. Thanks for your time, Laura. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Oops.